Well, what a wonderful Sunday already. It's great to hear you all singing. Every one of us comes with an instrument on Sunday mornings. We get to sing to our great God and Savior, and I'm blessed every time we get to experience corporate worship together. If you have your copy of God's Word, why don't you open up with me to Genesis chapter 3. I know we haven't been there in several weeks, but we're going to continue our study through that book this morning. As you're turning there was several years ago when Matt Thalen, one of our wonderful piano players, he was helping do some construction at our house, building an addition for Bruce and Carol. And I was helping him hang drywall on the ceilings, which was extremely challenging. We were struggling to hold that 4 by 8 foot piece of drywall and step up the ladders together, and then hold the drywall piece up onto the roof or the ceiling beams, and then one of us would drill it in and then scoot down and go over and drill it on the other side. And so it took us a while to kind of develop a system, especially in tight corners and tight places. And there was a particular room, the laundry room, where we were trying to get in a full sheet of drywall and put it up on the ceiling without it breaking or busting and all of this. And so we did it. And we got up there to the top of the ladders, and we're like, "Oh, we did this! We were so cool. We thought we were hot stuff to finally have done this properly." And we're up there, holding the drywall up to the ceiling, and then we both kind of look down, and we're like, "Hey, you have the drill gun, right?" And so that victory was quickly realized to be a defeat, and we saw we thought we had this down, but we actually missed out quite a bit. And it is very easy and commonplace for apparent victories to be revealed as defeats. We've all experienced that. And as I was thinking through our text and our passage this week, I was realizing that this is a little bit of what Satan experienced in this chapter. All right, what was Satan thinking about as we work through this chapter, right? At the very beginning of this chapter, right, and verses 1 through 5, we see Satan in the form of a serpent, or possessing a serpent, come in and speak with Eve in the garden. And in those first 5 verses, we see this conversation and Satan tempting and successfully enticing Eve to look at the fruit that was forbidden, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This fruit that was forbidden, he points her towards it, and without explicitly saying so, he urges her to eat it. In verse 6 of this chapter, we see that Eve saw that the fruit was good, that it was appealing to her eyes, that it was capable of making her wise, and she, after seeing and desiring it, she reached out and she took it and she ate. And then she gave it to her husband who was with her. And with that, we have the fall of man coming immediately after the temptation of man. And in those moments, right after Adam and Eve partook of the fruit, right, Satan was successful. What was he thinking in that moment? Like, hey, I have been victorious. Was he thinking that he had won the day? Right, he had already led a rebellion in heaven, leading a third of the angels to rebel against God. And those fallen angels are what we would now call demons. So in that moment, is Satan thinking, I have won, I've done it? Right, he might have been doing a little victory dance or been exuberant. But he might have thought that he was successful in leading all of humanity astray. And he might have even thought that there's no hope of redemption because he, as a fallen angel, has no hope of changing his fate or changing his state. Now, there is no redemption for angels who have rebelled against God. And so maybe Satan was even thinking, there's no way God is going to be able to change this. That he might be thinking that he has completely undermined and destroyed God's plan for the creation that has just been established. Well, Satan might have been thinking any number of those things, but ultimately the victory of Satan was short-lived. Because as we have already seen, the consequences of sin play out immediately in the life of Adam and Eve. And as they're experiencing those natural consequences of sin that we saw in verses 7, the realization of guilt and shame. They were previously naked and unashamed, but now they realize that they have a guilt and there's a shame, so they make clothes for themselves out of fig leaves. And now Adam and Eve are really at odds against God without even realizing it, because of what Satan has enticed them to do and that what they have chosen to do. They even try to hide themselves from God, which again doesn't last for long because you can't hide from God. But God comes and questions them as he's walking in the garden in verse 8. He asks them what they have done. And do you remember what each of them did? They each took ownership for their responsibility in the events, right? No, they each shifted blame. Adam said, "The woman whom you have given to me, right? She gave to me and I ate." And the woman said, "Well, the serpent deceived me." All right, that brings us up through verse 13. God is there with them in the garden. And whenever you see a physical manifestation of God in the Old Testament, we need to understand that is the second person of the Trinity. That's not God the Father. That's God the Son. That's a pre-incarnate Christ. That's Jesus there in the garden speaking with Adam and Eve right now. And in verses 14 through 20, we're going to have a verdict from God. We're going to have the consequences of what has just taken place. And he's going to address each of the three parties in turn. He's going to first address the serpent. And there's going to be consequences laid out for the serpent. And then there's going to be consequences laid out for the woman. And then there's going to be consequences laid out for the man in verses 14 through 20. Notice a few things. He's going to address the serpent first. And there's going to be, that's what we're going to look at today. He's going to then address the woman, and she's going to get one verse. And he's going to address Adam last, but Adam has the most information given to him. He's going to talk about the curse and the consequences for Adam in a greater detail and at greater length. And so if you just look at the emphasis, there's a greater emphasis upon the serpent first and the man last than there is upon the woman in the middle, even though she was the one that first gave in and ate the fruit, but she was deceived. But look with me at verses 14 through 19 this morning. And Yahweh God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you more than any of the cattle and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you will go, and dust you will eat all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel." To the woman he said, "I will greatly multiply your pain and conception. In pain you will bear children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." Then to Adam he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, 'You shall not eat from it,' cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you will eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you, and you will eat of the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you will eat bread, till you return to the ground, because from it you were taken. And you are dust, and to dust you shall return." Let's pause and pray before we continue our study. Almighty Father, you are the holy and infinite one. To you belong all the glory and majesty. Yours is the kingdom and the power. You deserve our adoration. You deserve our allegiance and our worship every moment of every day. Help us now to study the word that you have given to us, the word that you have revealed, which teaches and instructs us about the world that we are living in, about how we came to live in a world that has suffering and death, sickness, natural disasters. The creation seems to be against us, and this tells us why. But Father, also help us to see your character and your goodness in this passage, and the hope that you have expressed to all humanity, even as you give the promise of your Son. Help us to look to your word. Help us to look to your Son for wisdom, understanding, and salvation now. We pray in his name. Amen. So as I mentioned, we're only going to look at verses 14 and 15 and God's words directed to the serpent this morning. And what we're going to see is the divine consequences that God is going to begin to bring upon these three parties who have rebelled against him. Previously, earlier in Genesis 3, we looked really at the natural consequences of sin. God didn't even impose those upon Adam and Eve. He didn't say, now you have to feel guilty. He didn't say, now you have to feel shame. Those things came about on their own because of just the way God has created the world. Those are realities woven into creation. But now we're going to see God imposed consequences upon the serpent for his involvement in the temptation of Adam and Eve. And the curse of God proclaimed against the serpent here in Genesis is going to have echoes and reverberations throughout the rest of human history. Now, we've talked about this in the past. Genesis 3 is so vitally important because it establishes the story that we are living in. It tells us about the world around us and why things are the way that they are. And especially what God is going to say now is going to help us to understand the world around us. And so we might ask, what consequences did God bring upon the serpent for the role that he played in the fall of humanity? Really, in these two verses, there's two portions to the consequences that God proclaims against the serpent. The first of these could be called the curse towards the earthly animal. And the second portion of the consequences are directed towards the fallen angel. The earthly animal and the fallen angel. And so verse 14 tells us about the curse upon the earthly animal. And this is God speaking to the serpent, and he's directly relating what he is about to pronounce, this curse. He directly relates it to what has just happened. Right, the beginning of verse 14. And Yahweh God said to the serpent, because you have done this. Right, because you have come into the garden, because you have disguised yourself, and because you have spoken this way and tempted the woman in this capacity, God pronounces this curse. He says, cursed are you more than any of the cattle and more than every beast of the field. And now notice, God doesn't come and question the serpent about what he did. We don't even know if the serpent is present there. I would bet he slithered off into the garden somewhere. God doesn't then turn, he spoke to the man, spoke to the woman. He doesn't turn to the serpent and says, well, what were you thinking? He immediately moves to pronouncing a curse upon the serpent. And the idea of a curse is very, very significant here. This is the first curse in the entire Bible. And a curse is the opposite of a blessing. And we've already seen God bless his creation. If you look back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 22, the first time we saw a blessing that was on the fifth day when God blessed the creatures in the sky and the creatures in the waters, the birds and the fish. And verse 22, God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the seas and let the birds multiply on the earth. Later in verse 28, God's first words to humanity, God did what? He he blessed them. All right, what were God's intentions for his creation? Blessing, not cursing, blessing. He wanted his creation to thrive. But now because of sin and rebellion, God is going to pronounce a curse. And from a human perspective, right, if you were to curse someone else, you'd really just be wishing harm or catastrophe upon them. But from a divine perspective, when God curses someone, it's not merely a wish. God is not wishing catastrophe to fall upon the serpent here. He is pronouncing a judgment. When God curses someone, you can be sure that it will come to pass. It's not a wish, it is a final statement. It is a judgment of what will happen. And this pattern of divine blessings and divine curses, this is going to be a significant theme, not only here in Genesis, but also throughout the entire Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah or the Pentateuch. This is a significant theme that's going to be introduced to us here. And when God says that the serpent is cursed more than all the other livestock and all the beasts of the field, that kind of echoes what was the compliment that was given to the serpent back in chapter 3, verse 1. What was said? The serpent was more crafty, and what comparison was given? Than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And now, out of all of the beasts of the field, and in one sense, all of the beasts of the field, because they now live in a cursed world, all of them are going to experience death. All of them are going to have to work and labor for their food in the same way that Adam is going to have to do so. And we'll see that in a couple of weeks when we look at God's words to Adam. But the serpent here is cursed more than all of the other livestock because, yes, he's going to live in a fallen world, and now all creatures are going to experience death. But even more than that, the serpent is singled out as his nature is going to be changed. And we don't have this described or told to us about any other creature, but this is what is said to the serpent, right? 2 elements to this. What are the immediate consequences for this earthly animal? God says, on your belly you will go, and dust you will eat all the days of your life. And so the serpent was transformed at that point in time to now move about on his belly rather than on legs. And it's really interesting because if you were to look at snake skeletons, guess what you would find? Evidence of vestigial legs. And if you look at snake DNA, you know what you would find? The genetic remnants of limb development. And those genes are turned off early on as snakes are growing up, and that prevents limbs from forming. That's amazing that there's in their DNA is the encoding for limbs, but that gets turned off. You're like, well, who gets to turn that off? The Creator. And so the first consequence, the first element of the curse is going upon his belly. And then the second element, God says, eating the dust all the days of his life. And there's going to be a parallel here. And the words dust and all the days of your life are also going to be mentioned with regards to Adam. Because Adam is dust. And what is he going to have to do? He's going to eat from the ground all the days of his life. So there's parallels and connections here. But this is really, really interesting. It's not saying that the serpent is now going to live on dirt. Like that's what he's going to eat from this point forward. What is being emphasized is that if he's going on his belly and eating the dust, that's a way of saying that he is completely defeated. He's completely vanquished. Right? Elsewhere in the Old Testament, this picture of somebody eating the dust, of somebody laying their face in the dirt, shows somebody who has been defeated. Listen to Isaiah chapter 49, verse 23. It says, kings will be your guardians, and their princesses your nurses. And they will bow down to you with their faces to the earth and lick the dust of your feet. And you will know that I am Yahweh, I am the Lord. And those who hope in me will not be put to shame. So how do those people who are defeated, what do? They put their face in the dirt, in the dust, and they lick the dust. Micah 7:17. They will lick the dust like a serpent, like crawling things of the earth, and they will come trembling out of their fortresses. To Yahweh our God they will come in dread, and they will be afraid before you. Now, and so this picture of a vanquished foe is somebody who is laid in the dust and laid in the dirt. And God pronounces this curse upon the serpent that there in the garden, the physical animal, but then also upon every serpent and every snake after him who will experience this same thing. Now, and you might ask, and somebody actually sent me this as a question earlier in Genesis, like, why did God curse this animal if he had nothing to do with this, right? The snake might have protested, but I didn't do this. The Satan possessed me and led me astray. How can you rightly judge me? Well, God is sovereign. He's in control. And God does this for a reason. Now, I would say that reason is twofold. First, the serpent now becomes a visible illustration of God's curse. The serpent becomes a visible illustration. How do you know God is serious and that he's able to curse and do what he does? Because you look at the snake and you see him going about on his belly. You see this visible illustration of God's curse. And second, the serpent, I would say, is a perpetual sign of the defeat of Satan. When we look at the serpent now going about licking the dust of the earth, we are reminded of the fate of Satan, the demonic power behind the serpent in the garden. And this is intended to be a long-lasting sign. If you turn over with me to the book of Isaiah, in your copy of God's Word, Isaiah 65. Towards the end of Isaiah, there are descriptions of what the future rule of God on the earth will look like as his chosen king, his son Jesus, comes back to the earth to reverse the curse and make all things new. Listen to this description in verse 25. Like I said, all of the animals in creation seem to have been impacted by the curse. We don't know what things were like. We don't have too much of a description in Genesis 1, 2, and 3 of what the animals were like. There was no death, so I don't believe there were any carnivores. Animals were living in harmony with one another. And in the future millennial kingdom, things will return to that state. So look at Isaiah 65, verse 25. The wolf and the lamb will graze together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. Now that's incredible, right? Things will go back to the animals in complete harmony with one another. The wolf is no longer eating sheep, and the lion is eating straw like the ox. But what is the next statement? What animal never returns back to its original form and its original state? And dust will be the serpent's food. So even in the future millennial kingdom, when there's restoration, the serpent is still going to be a sign, a reminder that what has God done to Satan? What has God done to the serpent who rebelled against him? He has vanquished him. He has defeated him. Even in the millennial kingdom, the serpent is humbled and still eating dust as a reminder of Satan's defeat. And so we should think of snakes in the same way that we think of other biblical signs. Now, I know here in Idaho, we have had the privilege of seeing amazing rainbows. All right, sometimes the way that the storms come in, moving from west to east, and the storms will roll past our house. We live out in Nampa, and then we'll go outside, and there's been multiple occasions when we've seen a full rainbow double. All right, and we've taken these amazing shots and these amazing pictures, and we tell our kids, and what is that rainbow set there for? It is a sign. It's a reminder of God's grace, and we'll study this. I'm not sure when we'll get to Genesis 6 through 8. Don't hold me to any commitments there. But we will look at that in the future. And when we see the rainbow, we are reminded of God's grace, that he's never again going to judge the world in a flood. That was the covenant promise that God gave to Noah and to all creation after he judged the entire earth. And so I would say this, when we see a snake scurry across the grass, we should be reminded of what? God's curse and God's victory over the serpent, over Satan. That's why God curses the earthly animal here, and there's consequences for him, even though he was just possessed. Because God establishes that animal as a sign of his power and of his judgment. if you turn back over to Genesis with me. But this passage is going to promise and indicate the future victory of God, and this is going to be seen in the curse of the earthly animal. But God doesn't just curse the earthly animal. There's a much more significant power behind that needs to be addressed. And that comes to the second portion of the consequences that God lays out upon the serpent. And that second portion of this curse is going to be found in verse 15. You could say this is the curse upon the fallen angel. The curse upon the fallen angel. And as God continues this curse, again, attention is going to be redirected. And you might ask a really good question. Well, how do I know that God's attention has now been redirected? He's no longer just talking about a physical serpent, but now he's talking about a fallen angel who's behind that serpent. That's a really good question, right? If we're going to interpret things differently now in verse 15, what would lead us to establish that and to say that? And there's going to be a couple things in the text that are going to indicate things that are much bigger and broader than just a single serpent in the garden. And we'll kind of draw that out as we work our way through this verse. And in this verse, it's going to be the power behind that earthly animal that's going to be addressed, because he's speaking beyond just one individual animal, and he's speaking beyond into the future, and he's going to talk about a multitude of things. So we'll unfold there. It is amazing the theological depth of this verse here in Genesis 3, verse 15. And what we're going to see are these small kernels of truth that later revelation throughout the Bible is going to expand upon. And it's going to pick up the kernels that are laid for us here, and it's going to develop a rich theology. And so it's amazing in the infinite wisdom of God how he uses just a few words here to develop this rich theology of spiritual riches that are to come later on in his plan. The first thing I would draw your attention to is that God says that he will put enmity. He is going to be the one that causes or places enmity. And then he's going to unfold three ways or three manifestations of this enmity between individuals or groups. And so the first place that God is going to place enmity, and again, this is important to keep in mind, that God is the one causing this. That he says he's going to act. The first place that he's going to put enmity is between the serpent and the woman. And you might say, well, what does that mean? Why does God even need to say this? And again, going back to what might Satan have been thinking at that time? All right, he has in essence tricked Eve into joining his side. Say, hey, Eve has chosen to listen to the word and the counsel of Satan rather than the word and the counsel of God. But God is going to intervene, and Satan might have thought that he had won Eve to his side, and now she's going to follow him rather than following God for the rest of her days. But God says, no, that's not going to happen. And the way that he words this is he's going to say, I'm going to put enmity between you and between her, between the serpent and the woman. And that enmity is going to lead her to have a hatred and an animosity, a hostility towards this serpent and the angelic power behind the serpent. And she's not going to follow after the serpent. She's going to follow after God. And this is a remarkable statement because just a few verses ago, what did Eve do? She rebelled against God, right? She ate the fruit that she was not supposed to eat, and she aligned with Satan. And yet now God is going to say there's going to be enmity between the serpent and the woman. And the only way that is going to happen, who is it that hates and has animosity towards Satan in this world? The world is under his power and his influence. We talked about this several weeks ago, just looking at chapter 3, verse 1, to say who is this enemy that we're going to be introduced to here in Genesis 3? And we talked about his creation as an angel. We talked about the fall of Satan and his position that he had in heaven. And we saw that in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. We saw the position that Satan had and then his fall. And now he has power and influence over the world system that is in rebellion against God. We've looked at this in the past. And everybody, our initial position in this life is under the power and influence of Satan. And the only way you have an animosity towards Satan and the influence that he has in this world is if God does a work in your heart. Right? That's the only way there's a change, and that's a transformation. So it's really interesting and amazing to see that God is here saying about the woman, she's going to hate the serpent. She's going to hate Satan. And I would say that there's a foreshadowing, and it's not explicitly stated here, but there's an allusion to the promise of a new nature. Now, there's allusions to the doctrine of regeneration in a veiled way in which God is going to say, I'm going to put an enmity between Eve and the serpent. That there's not going to be a fellowship there, but there's going to be hostility. That's the first location that God is going to place enmity. There's a second location that God's going to place enmity, a second relationship, and that's in the next line. It says, between your seed and her seed. Okay, the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. And this is a theologically significant word again that we see. We've seen curse is a very significant word, and then seed is going to be a significant word. In Hebrew, it's the word zerah. And it's a very unique word. It can talk about just the seed of a plant that you're going to place in the dirt, in the ground, and it's going to grow up. But when it refers to, or in reference to a human being, it's talking about offspring. It's talking about children or descendants. And what's really confusing, and it offers actually a lot of wordplay theologically, is that this word, zerah, in the Hebrew can refer to a single individual or it can refer to a group of people. It can be singular or plural. And the word is going to be used repeatedly here in Genesis and in the entire Torah and really in the entire Old Testament. Now, to talk about descendants or offspring. And so it's easy to understand as God says, I'm going to place enmity between your seed and her seed. It's not just saying that women are going to hate snakes. Okay? Ladies, do you hate snakes? Yes, right? But there's a lot more here. Okay? And you're kind of looking and thinking about, well, I understand the seed of the woman. That's easy to see that is speaking about human offspring from Adam and Eve. But the seed of the serpent, does Satan give birth to demons? Answer, no, not at all. So when it says the seed of the serpent, and your seed, who's being spoken of? Who is that? And understanding that what is being laid out here is that there is going to be enmity, there is going to be hostility between those who are in that world system under Satan's power and under Satan's influence. There's going to be hostility between them and the seed of the woman, those who are those descendants of Adam and Eve whom God is going to save. There's going to be enmity. There's going to be hostility in this world because there's two different powers at work. And again, I addressed this earlier, so I'd encourage you to go back and look at that message on knowing your enemy in chapter 3, verse 1. But it's interesting because Jesus is going to describe these things in the Gospel of John. And he's going to talk about them repeatedly. In John chapter 8, verse 44, Jesus said this to the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees. He says, you are of your father, the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father. He's saying you are descendants, you are the offspring, the children of the devil. He's going to speak in these same type of theological terms, these same kinds of theological categories. John chapter 3, verses 19 and 20 says this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and men loved the darkness rather than the light, for their deeds were evil. right? When those who are under the world system, under the power and control of Satan, when light shines upon them, what do? They run away. They don't run to the light. They're not moths that attracted to the light. They're more like cockroaches, right? They scurry and skitter away. They don't want the light to shine upon them. Verse 20 continues, "For everyone who does evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds be exposed." So what is being laid out in this second location, the second place that God is going to enmity between your seed and her seed, God is saying that there's going to be a continual enmity between these two portions of humanity. And the Hebrew verbs here talk about a repeated or repetitive action. That God is going to place this enmity. It's going to be ongoing. And this also indicates a couple things. That, again, Satan might have thought, if I can get Adam and Eve to sin and rebel against God, there's going to be no hope of redemption, and I will be able to capture the entire human race. God says, no, there's not going to be everybody who's going to follow after Satan. There's not going to be everybody who's sucked in and enslaved by him. That God is going to be redeeming and saving some out of that world system so that there will be enmity between these two groups. And Adam and Eve are going to have children who are going to fall under the power and influence of Satan, and others will be saved by God. And we're going to see this play out over and over again in Genesis and beyond. And again, just think about this. The first two sons of Adam and Eve, what are their names? Cain and Abel. Genesis 4. What happens to those two boys? What happens? Right? One of them worships God, and one of them kills his brother because he worships God rightly and faithfully. And we're going to see Cain go further and further into sin. And he's going to be grieved by the consequences of his sin, but not by his sin. And he's going to wander further and further away from God. And we're going to see this play out as we continue to study our way through the scriptures, and just keep this in mind. We see this over and over again. And a part of what Satan wants to do is he wants to attack the line of faithful humanity because of what's going to be said next in this final location, or this final relationship in which God is going to place enmity. Right? He's going to place enmity between the serpent and the woman, between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. And then in the final two lines, God is going to say that there's going to be enmity between a particular descendant of the woman and Satan himself. God says, "He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel." And so what we have is a transition from speaking about seed as a plural, as a group of people, to speaking about a single individual, he. Who is he? Well, speaking about her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. And here's another important theological word that is even more hard to understand and comprehend, that this idea of bruising. Some of your English translations may have two different words translated in that verse. So you might say, he will crush you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. But in Hebrew, it's the same root word. That's why I appreciate the Legacy Standard, because it translates the same word in the same way right there in the context. But this word is only used two other times in the entire Old Testament. So it's hard to fully understand what it is saying, but the idea is of grabbing or bruising or crushing, of doing harm to something. And the word order here in these final two lines is emphatic. There's an emphatic contrast being made here. The he is in the first location, and you is in the first location in each line. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall do this to him. And both, there's going to be two bruisings, but the bruisings are not equal, right? What would you rather have, a bruise on your head or a bruise on your heel? Right? Which would be more significant? And so what is being stated here is that there's going to be this ongoing battle, but the battle between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, but it's going to culminate in victory for who? Not victory for the serpent. Remember, who's being cursed here, right? God's not going to say, hey, serpent, here's your curse. You're going to win, right? That's not what's going to be said. The curse upon the serpent is you're going to lose. You've started this battle. You're not going to win it. It's going to continue on into the future, but your destruction is sure. Because there is going to be a seed of the woman. There's going to be a son of Eve who's going to defeat you. Who's going to crush your head. You're gonna do some damage to him. You're going to bruise him on the heel. But he is ultimately going to be victorious over you. Now, the original Israelite audience, remember, who is Genesis written to? It's written to that second generation of Israelites that's just about to go into the promised land under the leadership of Joshua. They would have understood what was promised here was a future redeemer, a future serpent crusher. And they would have known a lot more because the rest of the Torah is actually going to give us more and more information about who this serpent crusher is going to be. And we'll actually look at that next week. Because as Revelation unfolds, as Revelation progresses, as God gives humanity more and more information, we're going to see who this guy is going to be and what he's going to do. But this is the first mention that we would say alluding to Christ. Now, alluding to who our Messiah, who our King, who our Redeemer is going to be. And this verse is known as the proto-evangelion. Now, the first mention or first hintings of the gospel in the Bible. And what's the context? It's a curse against the serpent. So even in the curse that God gives to the serpent, there's still going to be hope given to humanity as a whole. And a Redeemer is going to be promised. And again, in John's gospel, over and over again, even as we sang this morning, it was finished on the cross. Jesus is going to point to what he's going to accomplish on the cross as being his victory. John chapter 12, verse 31, it says, now judgment is upon this world, and now the ruler of this world will be cast out. Jesus is saying that leading into his final night, the Passover meal with his disciples. He understands that what's going to take place the next day is he's going to go to the cross, and that is where he's going to have victory over the serpent. He's going to crush the head of the serpent as he goes to the cross. That's what's going to lead to his victory. And the serpent is going to bruise his heel. Now think about, how would you get a bruise on your heel? Right? If a snake bites you on the heel, where was that snake? In front of you? No, behind you. How does Satan like to attack God's people? Not a frontal attack, but subtly. He doesn't come and announce himself. And we looked at that. Again, the schemes of Satan. He's going to attack the seed of the woman, but he's not going to truly defeat him. You might say, well, as Jesus went to the cross, it was not Satan's wrath that he experienced on the cross. It was God the Father's wrath. And yeah, that's right. Jesus experienced the wrath of God on the cross in payment for our sins as a penalty that you and I deserved. But keep in mind that what Satan was seeking to accomplish in sending Jesus to the cross was not our redemption. Satan was seeking to destroy God's chosen king. John talks about this as well, right after Jesus washed the feet of the disciples, including Judas Iscariot. John 13:27, after, as Jesus identifies Judas as the one who's going to betray him. It says, Satan then entered into him, speaking of Judas. And therefore Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. And then Judas went out, and it says, and it was night. There was a spiritual darkness there. And so ultimately it was the Satan working through Judas, just as he worked through the serpent in the garden, that led to the arrest and betrayal of Christ. And here's something that's really, really amazing, that I would say that, again, the original recipients of Genesis wouldn't have fully comprehended and beheld it. But again, the theology that's laid out for us here in Genesis 3:15 is truly, truly amazing. And I would even say this, that it points to the crucifixion itself. Because in the northern part of Jerusalem, as they have done excavations, they have found the remnants of people who have been crucified. And contrary to most popular media about how people were crucified, people weren't crucified and nailed through the palm of their hand, right? Because if you're nailed through the palm of your hand bones can't bear the weight of your body. And so what they would have done is they would have taken a large spike and they would have nailed through your wrist in a place where the bones lock together and there's a little gap there, and now you are stuck. You're not coming down. Well, a similar thing would have taken place as they nailed a person's feet to the cross. They wouldn't nail through your, the arch of your foot. What they would have done, and there's depictions of this artistically and also the remnants that they found in the northern part of Jerusalem, they found that the ankles were broken and demonstrated that there had been a large spike punctured through right underneath the ankle bone and the bottom bone of the foot. That little gap there. And that's how somebody would have been crucified, nailed to the cross through the heel. And that's how they would have had to push themselves up in order to breathe before they perished. So I said that the theological depth of this verse is completely amazing. Another side note, as God speaks here and he relates the curse to the serpent, he does that by referring repeatedly to not Adam, but to Eve. He's going to relate the future Redeemer as coming through the seed of the woman rather than the seed of Adam. And again, I would also say it doesn't necessarily point to or demand this, but I would say it harmonizes with the virgin birth. It harmonizes with the fact that it's going to come through the line of the woman, through Mary, not the line of fallen humanity through Adam. And this is going to be, again, it's not the primary meaning, but I would say it's an implication that kind of flows out of it. And one commentator puts it this way, if then the promise culminates in Christ, the fact that the victory over the serpent is promised to the posterity of the woman, not of the man, acquires this deeper significance that as it was through the woman that the craft of the devil brought sin and death into the world, so it is also through the woman that the grace of God will give to the fallen human race, the conqueror of sin, of death, and of the devil. And so again, next week I want to look more at the identity of the future serpent crusher and what is going to take place. But it's amazing, this verse, with all of its theological richness, because not only does God curse the earthly animal, and not only does God curse the fallen angel who led humanity astray, but he's also going to pronounce his own good intentions for human beings for all time. That God's going to announce his victory. God's going to announce and promise a future redemption through the seed of the woman. Martin Luther, who taught through Genesis, he had some amazing quotes, but I'll kind of wind things down with this one. He says this about this passage that he meditated on regularly. He said, "These words are not spoken by God for the devil's sake. God does not regard him worthy of his condemnation, but it is enough that his own conscience condemns Satan. These words are spoken for the sake of Adam and Eve, that they may hear this judgment and be comforted by the realization that God is the enemy of that being which inflicted so severe a wound on man. Here grace and mercy begin to shine forth from the midst of the wrath which sin and disobedience aroused. Here in the midst of most serious threats, the Father reveals his heart. This is not a father who is so angry that he would turn out his son because of his sin, but one who points to a deliverance. Indeed, one who promises victory against the enemy that deceived and conquered human nature." That what we see here is the character of God on display, even as he pronounces curse and it promises future victory over the enemy of humanity. And these two verses tell us the consequences that God is going to impose upon the serpent, right? Both the earthly animal and the fallen angel. And we see God's wisdom and his purpose in doing all of this. And we see the grace and mercy of God on display. And even though humanity has rebelled against God, even though Satan, maybe the top angel in all of heaven, has rebelled against God, at this point, who still sits on the throne? God. He's still in control. Nothing overthrows his plans. No one usurps his purposes. But God is even able to use this rebellion for the ultimate good and glory of his own name. And so really this is a message to Adam and Eve. This is a message to Israel. This is a message to all humanity about the grace of God that is going to be found in his Son. And we've talked a little bit about that. God sent forth his Son in the proper time, fullness of time, to be born of a woman, to live a perfect life, to die a sacrificial death, to be raised again on the third day. And God commands everybody, all people everywhere, to now look to him in faith. And everyone who looks to Christ in faith is brought into the plans and purposes of God. And we have a new nature. We're transformed. And now there's no longer going to be enmity between us and God, but there's going to be enmity between us and Satan. Satan doesn't like that. It leads to further conflict. But I want you to think about that, of really who's your daddy, right? Whose seed are you? Whose offspring are you? Jesus said of the Pharisees, you're of your father, the devil. Those are really the only two spiritual fatherhoods within the human race. There's going to be enmity between them. But God challenges us really to think that through. And he offers redemption for anybody who would come to him in faith. It was about 508 years ago when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg, Germany. And that kicked off and began the Protestant Reformation. And Martin Luther has written a song, I would say, probably in meditation on this verse. And I'm going to pray, and then we're going to sing this one final song in adoration and thanksgiving to all God is and all that he has done. If you would stand with me as we pray in preparation for singing, and just let's echo back to God all that he is and all that he has promised here.